Good evening, everyone. Whether you're from the UK, Ukraine, or elsewhere in the world, thank you for joining us for the fifth lecture in the UK UA Animation Lab initiative, which is run by Linoleum Festival and Squiggly Animation Magazine. It's supported by the British Council Ukraine and the Ukrainian Institute. So for today's subject, we will be looking at forming an animation team, key roles and responsibilities. And to walk us through this topic, we have the super experienced producer, Kasia Gromadzka. I'm not going to say too much about her because in her presentation introduction, she'll go into that a little bit more detail, but I just want to kind of give a bit of background about what Kasia has been doing. So she's a producer, an executive producer who has a focus on stop motion animation. Between 2010 2015, she worked various roles at Semaphore Animation Studio in Łódź, Poland. In 2015, she co-founded Momakin, where she coordinates the work of animation artists and producers and provides production services for animated and documentary projects. She is also one of the co-organizers of the ANIMARKT Stop Motion Forum, which is the leading annual stop motion event that brings the entire stop motion industry together in Łódź, Poland every autumn. Just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago, I understand, so we're very grateful that Kasia has managed to fit us in with her lecture this close to the event. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kasia now, and we'll be back for Q&As at the end. So thank you, Kasia.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for spending this time with us. In a minute, I will share with you the small presentation just to keep the structure of the talk a bit better. But just to let you know maybe why I'm here and why I'm going to talk about this topic is that for many years I've been invested into different projects on many levels, but not often developing my own IPs as a producer, which means I was part of different projects, many more projects than I would be if I would be developing my own projects on many levels of production. So both as co-producer, as executive producer of full projects, as executive producer of parts of projects, of some contribution parts, as service provider, etc., etc. So I was kind of in that team structure on many layers. This is maybe why I will try to talk a little bit about how this team could be structured also for your projects. So let me share the application now. I'm sorry, the presentation. Okay, I believe you should see it now. So to start with, there is no basically one way you can structure your team. Every project is super special. And to be honest, it's not going to be rules. It's not going to be the definitions of who does what exactly. It's going to be some tips and votes about how to structure such team and how to provide them good communication and good collaboration. Because the thing is that animation has so many varieties, you know, both on the level of production, like there are huge projects, there are international ones that have proper budgets and that are run by big teams, often international ones. And there are those small shorts. In addition, there's so many techniques that I can't even name all of them. I mean, every time people come up with new ideas, how to use even the pre-existing techniques. And therefore, there is no way to tell really how a team should be structured in terms of like, you know, animators and specialties of creative crews or technical crews, etc., because it can be a huge mix of things. So while structuring such team, you have to keep in mind all those aspects. I mean, both the size of the production, you don't want to overcomplicate the team if you have a small budget production or a short that doesn't really require that. And on the other side, you have to think, where are you shooting? What will be understandable for your team? What will be understandable for your funding institutions if you're going to use any? So I will mention a little bit later, for example, about the difference between the standards that are coming from Anglo-Saxon systems, from US and UK, and the ones that are coming from continental Europe, and how they mix and merge and why. And, about some individual structures. So there are many aspects of individual production like influences that will influence also the team. And also about sometimes, who is the initiator of the project, for example, things like the position between producer and director, because if the director comes to the producer and delivers the project in a way that it's his idea or her idea and they just want to make it work, the structure of the team will be slightly different than when the producer starts a project and initiates it and then looks for a director to direct it, which is quite common, for example, in the areas of series or some bigger productions. While having that in mind, you have to think, who are you looking for in terms of the type of people you want to work with? Because sometimes we're kind of mesmerized by those CVs or like dossiers of people that have huge experience in wonderful, huge productions that we all know. If someone worked on the sets or animation of these big productions, we consider them the best fit for every project, but it might not be true. Obviously, there are plenty of people that worked on huge projects that still have a huge diversity of skills. But very often, those who only participate in those big productions are very specialized and sometimes might not be a fit for a small budget short that requires a team to be very flexible in what they will be willing to contribute with. So you have to think, what will be the base of your team? What will be the idea on how you structure it? On a big production, it is quite natural, for example, that animators have their kind of assistants or like people who will contribute to their work. For example, it might be in some techniques, it will be in-betweeners. In other techniques, it will be like, for example, for stop motion that I personally specialize in. So I might give you a bit more examples on that. For example, animator will have a separate person responsible for rigging the puppet for them. So basically constructing some elements that will hold the puppet on set for them. And on small production, they will do it by themselves quite often, and they will have to know how to do it. If they only work on this kind of assisted positions, they might not have the skills to fully cover what you expect them to do. So this is very important when you look for your team, to specify what will be the exact scope of their work and what are your expectations for them to do. Because you might be surprised that the same position on different sides of the project will have a very different scope of work. The bigger the project, the more people are involved in the project, the more specialized the skills will be. There's also another possibility. Sometimes you have a small project and this project requires people with huge flexibility of skills and they will do a lot of things in them. But there's this one scene or this one character that you really need to have animated in the best way possible. And for that, you will hire this one very specialized person to do it. This is also a decision you can make. You're not kind of restrained by any outside rules. These are just the decisions that you have to consider and make before you hire people, and not after, when you would expect from them something that they are not kind of, they don't have predispositions to do. So just be clear about your expectations and don't think that naming the position is the same as telling your requirements and telling the scope of work. I will refer a little bit more to the projects with small budget, because quite often people who start obviously have limited budgets, and those are often independent productions that we start with. And we went through this no budget films, almost all of us. So what do you do then? You ask people to help you, basically. It's not that you hire them on the market value prices and market value fees. You just ask them to either lower their fees or contribute to the film in some ways without a wage. And this is all fine if both sides agree to that. Obviously, it's not the way to produce all your films, and it's not the way to continue with your career. But it is a way to create something to start with. And people did it, and people will do that. So that's totally fine. What is the issue that we all quite often come across is that later, once people agree to contribute to your film, you stop kind of respecting their time. And this is the problem, which later can cause, for example, people quitting on this job, even though later they agreed, or asking you for money when you have some success from that film, for example. So how to avoid it and how to make things clear from the very, very beginning. First of all, make sure that you actually validate people's work, which means that you sit down and you calculate what would be the actual cost of that work if they were to be paid on a normal basis. Maybe not commercial basis like for a commissioned project, but on a normal art house film that would have a budget. How much would their work normally cost, depending on their experience, if they would be a senior or junior, crew members, etc. Try to validate it. Try to know on both sides how much normally that work would be, and then make sure that you somehow sign an agreement, some kind of paper that you both agree that even though this work is worth this and this, I agree to work for reduced salary, or I agree to work for no salary. And in that way, I contribute to the film, and I still pass on the copyrights of everything I've created to you as a director or producer of the film. Often director, producer, I mean, two in one. So that it's very clear on what rules and with a common understanding this is done. I know it seems strange, especially if you ask your help for help your friends. But to be honest, it allows everyone to understand what they're doing and if they agree to the same thing. So to name the scope of work, to try to define it, to try to validate it, it makes it very good. And then on top of that, you have your copyrights regulated. So if later the film is publicly shown, you're not breaking copyrights of other people that contributed to your film. That's very important, especially if that film is awarded, for example, a cash prize, right? So it becomes a commercial project because in a way you gain from it. Obviously, it's usually your return of your work, but still it's some kind of gratification. If someone is on a strong level involved in your project, what you can do is you can use some mechanisms that are known also in professional production. These are deferrals and in-kind contributions. What are those? Those in a professional production usually are provided by companies, by co-producers and partners, or main key artistic crew members. And this means that you give some kind of contribution of your work. For example, a director comes with a script. He doesn't take the salary for the script at the moment of passing it to the producer, but he treats it as a deferral. What does it mean? Deferral means something that is delayed in time, in a way, some payment that is delayed in time, which means that he agrees he will not be paid for that script until the film starts earning money. The moment the film is sold, for example, somewhere, and everyone on the way recoups their costs, usually like the distributor, for example, they recover their money. And in most legal systems, those are perfectly fine. And you can ask a lawyer or a befriended producer to help you draft this kind of short agreement on a deferral, which says on which conditions this person is getting paid if ever this project generates money. The in-kind contribution comes usually with some copyrights. So, for example, you're doing your first film and your animator friend decided to help you, and they will animate half of the film basically. So they are a huge contribution to that film, but they will only get paid for like half of what they did. How can you handle that? You can give them part of the rights in return for their work that has not been paid. And this is their in-kind contribution that is being paid with shares from the film. It sounds a bit complicated, but it's always kind of an exchange, okay? One exchange is work, and on the other hand is copyrights to part of the film. So it means practically the right to gain some money if there are any in the future in the percentage. And the other one is if the film earns money in the future, you will get the proper amount. So this is not percentage, it's a proper amount of money that you agreed on. So these are the kind of system, like I said, you can ask also help from the producers that you know, or someone who is fluent with the legal system in your country to help you draft this kind of agreement. But this way, even with the smaller projects, you can still make sure that the copyrights are secured and that people's rights are validated. And last but not least, sometimes it's not only just about the validation of that work, it's not just about getting money, because the probability that the film will earn enough that someone gets the full salary that they would normally get is low with the independent shorts, for example, right? Even with professional productions, to be honest, hardly ever they generate huge incomes in terms of animation, especially short films. But what it is just allowing someone to know how much their work is worth, and that we as producers and directors see it, acknowledge it, and honestly want to give something back to them, you know, for helping with a production. And that leads me to another very important set of rules when you're building a team. You know, liking each other is amazing. I mean, it's so much easier to work when you like people you work with. But it's probably not the most important part of it, because I mean, it's also very difficult to build a team about the fact that people like each other. But the most important to me, and with my experience, is respect. Basically, you have to respect the other members of the team, their expertise, their experience, their knowledge, their specialties, and discuss with them with respect. And if that happens, you will get to the level of professionalism that allows you to have a conversation, even if you disagree on the solutions, and come up with better solutions. You have to trust that all of you want to make the same film, that you all of you want to make a film in general, and that you will support each other rather than, you know, kind of fight each other on solutions. So on each level, if people respect each other and communicate with each other, it allows you to come up with solutions that you will not be able to come up with alone. And this is how film works, because we don't do it alone. It's a common goal. It's a collaborative art. It's not, you know, a painting that you do by yourself. It's usually a team, and the bigger the project, the bigger the team. And you often cannot make it alone, or cannot make it alone in the quality and time that you can in a team. So that means that this respect as a base for everything else allows you to build a better team. So if you see someone being disrespectful, this is maybe not a person who should fit in your team also. And people should be able to tell you about it, and people should be able to share such comments with you. So I think while building a team, it's very important to make sure that all project members, even if they for any reason dislike each other or just are neutral to each other and they don't really care about each other in a way, that they respect each other professionally. This often also some kind of thinking that there are some rules in the film that are more important and less important, and more valued and less valued. And as obviously the rate levels are different for different jobs and different for different team members, it doesn't exactly mean that they are less or more important. You know, they are sometimes omitted, but they shouldn't be. And there are some costs and certain actions that you can make, and including the certain team members in some activities at certain stage, that will help you in the end save money and have a better working team, because the communication between team members will be better. So I've made a short list of things that I consider fake podcasts. So something at the beginning we consider as something we can kind of not focus on, or just treat a bit less with priority, with lesser priority. But in the end, it can bite us in the ass when we are in the middle of the project. One of those things is a technical team. We can have the best creatives if we don't have people who will support them technically, who will have the knowledge on how to execute the ideas. Obviously, it will not be easy to execute those ideas and to finish with the film that you have in mind. I think it's something that we see in big studios, and we should definitely not copy this idea, is that they value a lot the creatives, like directors and scriptwriters sometimes, although I think even that is not the case. Big names, people who will carry promotionally the project, and they do not care about those who execute it. And sometimes it's other creatives that are on like lower level in the pay grade, and sometimes they are the technical team. And I think this technical team needs to be also involved, because for example, in stop motion, quite often gaffers are completely omitted, you know. It's like, the DOP or like even the director will set up some light. You can do so much with light in stop motion. And even if you cannot afford a gaffer to be there for each and every scene and for each and every setup, hiring a gaffer, a professional gaffer, someone who actually knows how to set up a light at the very beginning, to set up the basic moods, for example, the film, or just show how you can build it around. And or for the most important scenes, like something that we really need to see some elements and hide others, can change completely how your film will work out at the end. So this sometimes, if you cannot afford someone full-time, some specialists, particular specialists, you can hire them for a consultation. You can hire them for a set of scenes, or just as a setup person. So someone who prepares the first idea of how it should work. The same is with maintenance. You know, you can. It's again more a thing of a stop motion and sets. But if you pay for puppets, someone making puppets, and you have to pay for them, even if you don't pay the person, you have to pay for the materials they made of. You need someone on set that will take care of them. So this is another example of something that is missing even on professional sets. An actual maintenance person who will make sure to retouch everything, to fix everything. And it's not going to be just someone that is like an intern or something, that is someone with a basic knowledge of techniques of retouching, and the basic knowledge of how the puppet works or how the sets are working, etc., etc. For all types of production, a proper person responsible for storyboard and good quality animatic is also a thing. Sometimes paying, for example, a fee to someone, like you don't pay a fee to a person, but for example, you pay a license for a good program for them to do storyboard and animatic. And this person, for example, will work for a lower fee, or you can negotiate it. Again, I mean, not the professional productions, but the beginners ones. is important, and allowing them to work fully in the conditions that they can provide you with the professional materials is very important. And it's the same with early consultations. Quite often, for example, it is not considered important to know who will edit or who will do the post-production of the project. If it has any elements that are slightly more complicated, there should be at least an idea of who does it. And even to ask them just, for a small fee, additional fee to come by and talk through the animatic and consult on that is very important. Sales agents are quite open, and distributors are quite open also to discuss projects on an early stage of production or development to see how they can help with the film so that it sells better in the future. So you can also start discussing this kind of projects early on. It doesn't mean that they will buy them right away. It doesn't mean that all of them will be, willing to give you an MG, so minimum guarantee for the film, so money that you can use for production. But at least they can give you an expertise, and they can also consult on things. So it's sometimes worth going to an event or going to the workshops and showing it to people. And it is money again. You have to spend money to go to those places. But it is worth for the outside world, especially people who will later sell your project to the world, to check it out and to see maybe they have some notes that are not changing the whole heart of the project, but that are making some tweaks and changes that really allow you later to have a project that will have a future and that will have an audience. Because it's not just about selling a film, it's also about making sure that the film has an audience. I mean, that's why we make films, right? It's not for us to just save it on our computers. It's for the world to see it. Once you have a team, and this will be, like I mentioned, different depending the size and the specialties of that team, it is very important to take care of that team. So to make sure that this team feels like they're important to the projects and that they have all the information and all the like the environment to work on the project. So it is very important to unify communication so that everybody can access the same information, so that it's updated, so that different parts of the team are not working on different materials, that everybody makes sure that they have the latest version of animatic, because as we know, that changes, and that everybody has the same references, the same ideas, the same script version, etc., etc., and that there is a system of supervision and that there is a system of overseeing the communication. It can be, if you're working all in one space, it can be put on a wall, on a pinboard. It can be put in a computer if you're working remotely, and you can use different online softwares. There are softwares that are paid, there are softwares that are free. You can even use, the very basic softwares that allow you to exchange information, to plan everything together, to have a schedule that is shared between everyone, and that everybody knows which deadline is for whom, so that others can continue with their work once the work of previous team is finished. And it's open for everyone and visible for everyone. If you have, a set or a studio in which people are actually physically working, so it's not, again, a remote situation, it's really nice to have some kind of comfort zone, some kind of place to rest, to have a proper meal, to sit down on a table and eat. I know it's sometimes really undervalued, but this kind of break allows people to have a way more efficient work later. So making sure that your team has access to that space and is not starving all day or in the dark all day or just staring at the computer, but you make sure that they are just healthy, will allow them to work better. If the project is bigger, and the team is coming from different parts of the world or different parts of the country, it is nice to help them find accommodation that is well commuted to the studio, that is nicely connected, and that is comfortable for them to arrive to the studio every day. Because this will take out hours of their life if it's not, and they will be more tired than they would be if you help them organize it. Because if you're inviting them to your studio or your partner's studio, there's always a person who knows the area who can help. Leaving them just for themselves to find it might cause later unnecessary, tiredness and unnecessary situations of them being late to the studio or just wasting their time during the day. And if they have, kids, dogs, and other family members, make sure that you help them take care of them. So maybe they can come with the dog to the studio if it's a quiet one and it doesn't make any issues, or maybe you can help them, for example, with some formalities to bring their members, because sometimes the visa is required or something. Make sure that you're helpful with that and that your team members, again, are taken care of, because they will be the one that makes sure that your film is done. So you want them to be focused on the film and not on the fact that they don't have anyone to take care of their kid, for example, right? Same with travel arrangements. If you can help someone by picking them up from the airport when they're arriving with a huge luggage, do that. Arrange it. If it fits into your budget, put it in your budget. Maybe negotiate that you pay for part of it and they pay for something else. It's a part of the cost of them coming to you and helping you with your film. And it's very nice to have on set the general maintenance person or runner, someone who will make sure that everything is accessible to the team, will make sure that all the materials are restocked whenever they are needed. It's on set, but also in terms of online production, you can also have this kind of person that will be just an emergency, simple help situation person who will make sure that the files that are no longer needed are removed from the computer, for example, from the drive, common drive, from the online softwares, that will make sure, like a helper to everyone. This kind of person who will have time to do it and who will have time to assist team on different levels. And in this case, they can be even interns, if it's just a general runner. But make sure there's someone to help the team, even if it's a small one. And then there is production team, and I sometimes feel like most film schools and even professional trainings, they don't really explain who the producer is and who people in production team are. They just appear, and they always say there's no money, and they always tell everyone to do everything faster and have weird expectations. So I put together a little bit. First of all, the scope of work of the production team as general. So what you see here is a very general scope of the whole department of production. And later I will try to very shortly tell you what different people in production team does, depending on the size of that production team. Because again, depending on the size of the project, the bigger the project, the bigger the team, the bigger the production team, because we are the connectors of all those elements. The more elements, the more connectors we kind of need. So obviously the producer is someone who is in charge of money. I think this is the most obvious and common association. Yes, we are the ones to create the budget and later supervise it, and later, follow up on it and see if it's executed. The budget can be made in so many different ways. It can be private money, obviously, not a typical situation, especially in Europe. But it's usually a bunch of different public sources that each has a very strange, different, expectations and regulations, and they're usually very slow in processing everything. So quite often it's like a patchwork of sources of financing, and each of that source of financing has their own way of giving you the money, of expecting things that will be done for those money, and expecting where you report to keep those money. And because of that, sometimes producers can have different expectations from the team on reporting, on the way how they buy things or how they are being paid, or even who the team member is. I will say a little bit about it later, but that's also something that the funding institution can influence on. And the producer is the person, and the production team are those people who are making sure that the money that were promised to the film arrive to the film and are kept in the film. Because like I said, it's a lot of work on following up all the expectations of the funding institutions. This is the most common situation. Like, honestly, other than Leica, there's not that many places in the world that you can work for like one person's money, basically. They have private money, but nobody else does. Then there's schedule that is highly defined by the budget, but it is also highly defined by what you are doing and how big your team is. And obviously, the longer the schedule, the longer time we make the film, the higher the budget. Unless, of course, we do it after hours, but I mean a professional production, because you just have to pay longer for having the either the equipment or the licenses on the programs, keeping people in the loop, and all that generates costs. So usually production team wants to have the schedule that will allow for a good balance between how long it takes and how big the team is. Because on the other hand, if we try to shorten the schedule too much, we're trying to build a bigger team because more people have to work simultaneously. So you want to balance it. And this is another element that the production team would be responsible for. And again, it will be the creation of the first idea of how it will work, and during the film, supervising it and following up on any changes or any elements that might influence it. Then there is organization of the pre-production and production, and one of the major elements that will define everything, like how the film is done, basically, something that is highly underestimated, that is a breakdown. Breakdown is like a huge analysis of the film on the level of script, storyboard, or animatic, usually all three of those, and the final one will be made on animatic, which defines everything that has to be done in that film. So defines how many assets each element needs, how much time we need to do that assets, and how much money we need to produce them. And this kind of master plan of the film is a breakdown. And it's a production team that is responsible for putting that together, but it doesn't mean that they will come up with all the solutions by themselves. They will ask you a million questions and gather information from all departments to make sure that the final film has all the assets that we need, so that in the end, the person who is closer to the end has all the assets from the beginning of the chain, right? So this is what the production team does. Goes to every department and asks, what are you going to need to do that? What are you going to need to do that? And gather everything all together. Later, it's also responsible, obviously, for following on the post-production part of it and delivering the film in the format and in the technical quality that is required by either cinemas or televisions or platforms, or all of them usually. Because if you want to really to get something from the film after it's done, it usually has a little bit of all the types of distribution, because you want to broaden your audience as much as possible. Almost all films that are like not commissioned films will go through the festival run. Even, I mean, the television projects like series or TV specials, they still go through the festival run, and that means you need to have a theatrical copy of your film. And later you need to have a TV or platform one, because even if it's a theatrical film, in the end you want it to be available for the broader audience through TV or platforms, right? So this post-production is also gathering information from the distributor side or from broadcaster side and making sure that the post-production team knows what effect we need. And there has to be communication, obviously, between the production team and post-production team. That's also under production team's work. There's a sentence that says connecting between ATL and BTL. This is something that comes from the Anglo-Saxon system of budgeting, which comes also from the Anglo-Saxon system of dividing team into two. ATL people or ATL costs are above the line costs and above the line team members. This means that this is everyone who holds the initial copyrights to the film. This is the easiest explanation or who that is. This will be the key creatives and key holders of copyrights. So from the main producer to director, often DOP, if it's like a strong role, music composer, and usually there's not that many people in that group, but this is the group that is there for the film for all the process that is involved from the beginning to the end, and that is making influence on the total shape of film from the beginning to the end. And the BTL people, below the line people, and below the line costs are more related to those who execute the ideas of those that are above the line. And the production team needs to make sure that the below the line group knows exactly what kind of film came from the minds of the above the line group. And this connection and this making sure that everyone knows that we are doing the same film and that we are not detached from each other is also a task of a production team. And then obviously there is a simple administrative work that is often 90% of the time, which is hiring people correctly in the legal way, making sure that the agreements are signed with everyone who is participating. So everything that I mentioned at the beginning, that is related to securing the copyrights, that comes with the validation of the work of people, or the permits that might be needed to do something. For example, usage of some assets, like you want to use the found footage photo, you want to use an image of someone. It's the production team that will make sure that you can legally do that, because obviously animator can even find such asset and can process it, but there has to be someone that makes sure that in the end the whole film will not be rejected, for example, by festivals or later broadcaster because the copyrights has not been claimed on that, or the permits of usage of somebody's image, for example, has not been cleared to do so. Okay, so this is also this part that is slightly like legal, administrative, a bit of accounting, lovely stuff. And here are a few names that come across quite often and cause a lot of confusion. Obviously, we have the producer. Producer is the big boss, let's say, the person who comes up with a project or at least accepts and initiates that it will be made based on the idea of the director. So someone who makes a decision, yes, we make a film. Then we make a film and we are able to gather this and this amount of money for that film. And then decisions that follow. So the most decisive person is just a producer, a physical producer of the film. There are different ways to further define this kind of person. For example, quite often lately we hear about creative producers. These are producers that are more invested on the creative side of the project. They might be initiators of the idea of the project. They might be included in the script writing. They might be included in the choice of the visual team, etc., etc. They influence also the decisions on the creative side. Not all producers will do that. Some will give greater freedom to the directors and other team members. So in the end, the creative person responsible for the whole creative part will be a director. But some producers do, and then quite often they're called the creative producers. But it's still a producer, so it's still a person that is mostly responsible for making sure that, well, first deciding that the film will be made and then making sure it will be done by their decisions. And then there's people that depend on the amount, and their rules depend on the size of the project. So basically every project should have a project production manager. A production manager is just a day-to-day person who oversees the production and makes sure that things are done on set and off set, for example, with the administrative work. There's production managers that are office managers, so they are people who are more responsible for the administrative work, and there might be production managers who will be more responsible for coordinating the production also on site or directly with the team. And these are the kind of people who in many projects are hired on the moment when things start to generate more work. So not at the idea level, not at the script writing level, but at the level of when we start talking about the applications to the funds, and there's administrative work that is connected with that needs to be done, and later preparing the whole shooting or the animation process, pipeline, etc. At this stage, and quite often later do not work directly that much, for example, with distributors, and just make sure that the film itself is being done. The greater role on that might have an executive producer, and this is the most confusing job in production teams because it has completely different definitions in continental Europe and in Anglo-Saxon system. So when you read executive producer on an American blockbuster, quite often these are actors that are working in the film. And why are they there? Because executive producer in the American and quite often UK system is a person that brings either talent and copyrights with it, or money, or both, because it sometimes goes with both. So actors that agree to work for a lowered fee, or actors that bring a certain amount of investors with them, will be considered executive producers. And then the producer actually responds to them. So they have to keep up, they have to update the executive producer on the stage of the film. They have to make sure that they deliver to them as investors and copyrights owners a proper product. But this is a very different situation in the continental Europe, where executive producers or delegate producers are the ones who are delegated to execute the film, and both names, okay? So in that way, executive producer is a person who is responsible for delivering the film within the budget designed by a producer, and within the artistic scope that was thought through by director and producer. And they have to make sure that all those elements that the production team prepares goes together and is followed up on. Sometimes executive producer can be responsible just for the part of work, and will be, for example, executive producer for an animated part in a bigger project that is a documentary but has animated inserts, okay? So then this person is executing just this part of work that is defined by their like task responsibility, and this is what they need to execute. They're still executive producer, but not of the film, but of the part of the film. For example, they can be local executive producers. So, for example, there's few co-producers, and one co-producer is responsible for the part that is 2D in the film. For example, it's a mixed techniques, and there is one country that is responsible for delivering the 2D part. They might set up a separate executive producer that will make sure that this part is well communicated with the rest of the production and is delivered in the way that the rest of the production needs it. so the lead producer and the rest of the team. Okay, so again, overseeing that everything is delivered. And then there is line producers that are usually hired for either series or features or co-productions that are between many countries, which are often series and features because they're bigger projects. This is the person who is responsible usually for one film at a time. The rest of the people sometimes skip between the productions. And line producer is a person, it comes from this line, that is between above the line and below the line. It's a person who puts together everyone. So countries and groups of professionals in the teams, and make sure that basically everyone follows the same budget, everyone follows the same schedule. They will be the person who will do the breakdown for all parts, and they will be the persons who will make sure that there's a communication between above the line and below the line, no matter how many teams of below the line we have, because sometimes we can have a very one director and one producer or a few co-producers, but the above the line will still be pretty tight, while the below the line will be, for example, 4 countries, different teams working in different techniques. Has to be someone who oversees it and delegates the information and makes sure to bring back the materials and the information from those teams. And this is the line producer. And the line producer is fully responsible from the film, from early on to the very end. So oversees the whole process. And at the same time, they're the people who are really focused on one film, like I said. They cannot be doing that much simultaneously. They have to be really seated with this one project, and they will be a connecting point for all teams that appear on the way, because there will be, pre-production people, production people, post-production people, and there's still one person connecting throughout all the process. With very complicated projects, this person is really necessary.
Sorry to interrupt you, Kasia.
Yeah.
Just to let you know, we've had about 10 minutes left for your presentations. Yeah. We can do the 10 minutes for the Q&A, just in case. Yeah,
I think it should be. I have a clock here. I set up for myself to limit myself.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you for reminding. So for more complicated projects, there is different managers of different stages of production, such as post-production officers, managers, office managers, unit. So if you have few units working on a film, you can hire a scheduling supervisor, so someone who is just responsible for making sure that the schedule is right and that it's taking into consideration of aspects of it. So again, depending on the complexity of the project, you will need more production team, because those elements are too complicated for one person to handle them on all levels. Just to summarize all the things that influence on the team, that is the complexity and structure of the film, but also the individual relationships between people and the position of particular people on the market, for example. It will be differently structured. If we have a huge name of a director, it will be differently, because there will be more people around the director, basically, people who he will or she will propose for the job. They're quite often working on some long-term collaborations, etc. So this will also influence how you build a team. But I really wanted to stop for a second on funding requirements. It's missing an R. Funding requirements and limitations. This is something that is sometimes, when you enter the professional production and start working with funds, this is kind of destroying your idea on how to build a team. And in the end, it can be a huge influence on who works eventually on your project. If you want to enter into co-productions or even produce in your own country, but using, for example, different regional funds, they will expect you to work with local teams. And the funny thing is that they define local teams differently depending on the fund. So you have to understand what their requirements are before you apply to them. Because if you have a team in mind and you know that this team is coming, for example, all of them from one country, you cannot go to a presentation of pitching and say, I'm looking for co-producers. You're not, because you cannot split the work because you already have your team. And if you enter into co-production, the co-producers will require from you that you give part of the work to them. They will not just bring you money to spend it on your own team that you have in your own town. They will say, we will get the money, but we will spend them in our own country or on specialists that are from our country. Maybe it will be the 100% of the money they get that they have to spend in their country. Maybe it will be 80%, like in Poland, that there's a rule that Polish Film Institute allows you to spend 20% of the funding outside. Or maybe, like a lot of local funds, they will require that you spend 150 or 200% of the money they give you in their region. What does it mean? That you have to bring from other places the money to spend even more than you get from that region. So you have to shift the money from other places. These are requirements of the spend quite often. So kind of the regulations that say you have to spend it on costs that are in these countries. Usually this comes with who pays taxes where. So the person is considered that they are the local spend if they pay tax in that country. Sometimes it's other requirements. For example, there are countries that have regulations that money has to be physically spent in their area. So this is the Flanders, for example, one of the Belgian funds in Flanders. They require the money to be physically spent in the place. So, for example, in the studio that is local, not just artists that are from there and go work somewhere else, but like physically there. There are other funds that want you to bring people from many places, and you can bring them from other countries, but they don't have to be local, but they have to work on in a region or in the country. So making sure that you know that and understand that, and you're not surprised later that you cannot pay to that person that you really had in mind you want to be your creative person or your technical team member, because you have the money, but you can't spend it on this particular person. Is super important, and that when you start thinking about co-production, for example, that you make sure that you leave the gap of creative contribution, because this is another requirement, that this is also a need of other companies. If they enter into a project, they want to be creatively contributing to that project. And usually their regional or local funds will require them to have that contribution to show that the film is not just Ukrainian or just British, but that if it's a co-production with Poland, that is also partially Polish film, not just money-wise, but also creative-wise, so that there are talents from Poland used to create that. For example, it will be different in every country. In Poland, there's a rule that, for example, for animation, it has to be either animation director or art designer or music composer, but also at the same time that certain percentage of animation has to be done in Poland. It's also a requirement. So once you start collaborating with Poland, you have to take that into consideration, that you cannot think about your team as fully coming from your country, that you have to share the work. And that's how you get the money from those countries, that the money will not come freely to be spent wherever. This is a huge influence on building international teams, And then you have to think, for example, okay, my director doesn't really speak English, so I cannot have creative working directly with my director who don't speak my language, for example. So I cannot have a collaboration with the country that will not be able to provide me with artists that will communicate with my director, These kind of things. So think about it when you build your team, but think about it when you are looking for extra funding and when you're looking for partnerships, because then it will influence the way your team is built. I spoke a little bit about the different systems of the budgets that also influence the way we structured the production, so I'll skip it right now. But these are, again, a little bit notes for you on this whole system of influencing team by international productions, because there's something called co-productions and there's something called gap funding and there's something called services. So if you're looking to co-produce, again, you have to split the creative work. If you're looking for gap funding, you're looking for basically an investor that will give you just the money. And this is how you should say if you're looking just for money, not the team split. And then there's a third version that is just hiring someone, a service, a subconstructor from another country. They will not get any money for you, but they will, for example, do the job better or cheaper, or they're more specialized in something you need. While you're at the pitching sessions, for example, presenting your project, or while you're looking for your team members, you have to know what you're bound with, so which rules of this you're bound with, and what are you looking for. So if you're looking for co-production, again, keep in mind sharing work. If you're looking for gap funding, this is an honest way of saying I'm looking for an investor, but the investor will come only if you have the majority of money already on board. So gap funding is usually considered the last 20% of the budget and not more. So if you're looking for 50% of your budget, it's very low probability that someone will allow you to use the gap funding scheme, so someone will invest money basically into your project. And then there is services. If you go with services to someone, make sure that you have money to pay them, not just physically have the money, but know that you can spend those money in the country where the service provider is, okay? So this is also something that restrains you in bringing your team together. And with this bad news at the end, I guess, I think we can finish and have some questions.
Thank you, Kasia. That was perfectly timed. We have about 10 minutes for questions now. So thank you so much. That was super insightful, and you covered everything that I hoped you would cover. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have a couple of questions in waiting, so I'll go with the first one that we had. Someone's asked how efficient and meaningful it would be if a producer and a director are the same person. Do you have any experience with this or advice on this?
I will always and forever say, do not mix those two. It seems like it's another fake saving money cut, you know? Because what happens is that directors are supposed to direct and have a creative vision on it and have a creative way of looking at the project. And producer should be the one that looks at the film as a holistic thing, meaning that it takes into consideration also the production aspect of it, and money, and timing, and administration, and rules of the funds, and all of that. If they don't have the possibility to clash and to meet and to talk and to discuss, usually you don't come with good solutions, basically, because you only kind of argue with yourself like another person in the mirror, and there is no filter through your ideas. You cannot have really two perspectives that are completely different, you know? Mm-hmm. What happens is usually that directors get attached to scenes, directors get attached to things that were, for example, a lot of work, you know, and they cannot make the decision to cut on something. And because of that, generate more costs instead of less costs. So usually having someone who contributes to your film as a production person, as someone who's just an outside look at it in the way, and your first reviewer, your first, person to bounce from, because later it will be many, it will be crew members, it will be funding institutions, etc., it will be audience in the end. This first supervisor, this first person who looks at it differently, is super important, and it will allow you to also see if what you're saying as your vision is clear. Because if you cannot explain your film to the producer, you will not be able to explain it to the crew members, and in the end, you will not be able to deliver it clearly to the audience. So I think the producer gives you the opportunity to structure your film better, more efficient, and basically to be your partner throughout that project that will allow you to have this different perspective.
Absolutely. As a producer myself, I couldn't agree more. So thank you for echoing what I would, my sentiments exactly. We have time for one more question. So I'll just, I think we'll have this one and then wrap up. So this is about being a freelancer and bringing freelancers into a production. So some studios, they fully involve freelance specialists into the production, like they allow them to communicate with the core team and everything. And others, they're more isolated from the production. And this person's asked, what is the best practice and how does that kind of change things within a production?
It usually comes with the level of control of the studio, of the IP. So usually the more money, the more kind of secretive you want to be about the project, and the more in control of project you want to be. And that usually requires having an on-site team and less spread out team. And so it usually comes with the size of the production and the kind of money that we're talking about. I believe that it's actually efficient to communicate with the freelancers on board. So I would rather have them kind of like invested in the project. But it's because, you know, I'm not working for a Disney studio who prefers to have control over what they do because of the IP control. It quite often comes with the fact that the more insight you give to people from outside, the more they can pick out also, which is the assets that you're working on, which later might be merchandising. So it's quite often the legal and logistics that are stopping the studios from allowing in freelancers inside the studio so much. I mean, inside in terms of like the involvement, and they just kind of subcontract a very small amount of work without giving them an insight. I think it's quite common among some studios, which I actually appreciate, that, for example, if they have this kind of very strongly commercialized projects, they also allow people to kind of pitch their small projects and do some side jobs, because then they feel also creative, because you want to keep your collaborators, freelancers, artists, creative. If they only get a very small amount of work to work with, and it's very technical, it's very execution kind of work, that it's not creative at all, that they cannot contribute to the projects, they will get basically depressed with that, and they will get less and less efficient in their work. So some studios balance it, and they have those super high profile, very commercial projects that are very secretive, and they are very structured and very in control of the heads of the studio, while they also have more creative opportunities for their collaborators and even team members, who often work the same way without access to actually being creative.
Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry that we're going to have to wrap it up now, but yeah, we've hit the end right bang on time. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for tuning in and the questions. And we have one lecture left in our series, which will be next Wednesday, same time, 4 p.m. UK time, 6 p.m. Ukraine time. And follow us on our social platforms for more information about the last lecture. But thank you again so much. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.